It is the early morning of June 30th, 1860. Road Hill House stands in the village of Road, spelled road at the time, in Wiltshire, England. Wiltshire is a county in the southwest of the country, a landscape of rolling chalk downland and stone villages, farming country, the kind of England that seems entirely removed from the noise and violence of the cities. Road Hill House is a solid, comfortable residence, 10 bedrooms, extensive grounds, servants, the full machinery of respectable Victorian domestic life in full operation. At approximately 7 o'clock in the morning, a nursemaid named Elizabeth Goff goes to check on the 3 youngest children in the nursery. She finds 2 of them sleeping normally. The third, a boy of 3 years old named Francis Kent, is gone. The household is roused. A search begins. Within hours, the body is found in the vault of the outdoor privy, the outhouse at the back of the property. Francis is still dressed in his nightshirt. He is wrapped in a blanket, and his throat has been cut so deeply that he is nearly decapitated. He is 3 years old. The case that follows, known in the Victorian press as the Great Crime of 1860, will grip England for 5 years. It will destroy a Scotland Yard detective's career. It will be botched by the local police in ways that would make any competent investigator weep. It will produce a confession 5 years after the fact that resolved one question and created a dozen more. And it will give Wilkie Collins everything he needed to write the novel that T.S. Eliot would later call the first, the longest, and the best of modern English detective novels. 3 questions will follow us today. What actually happened at Road Hill House on the night of June 29, 1860, and did Constance Kent's confession tell the truth? How did the investigation go so catastrophically wrong that a brilliant detective was publicly destroyed for being right? And what does that tell us about Victorian England's relationship with class and justice? And how did the Road Hill House murder, a real crime, never fully resolved, plant the seeds of detective fiction as we understand it today? Before we go any further, if this kind of storytelling is what you have been looking for, the subscribe button is just below this video. We cover true crime and criminal history from around the world, told with the detail and rigor these stories deserve. No sensationalism. No rushing through the facts. Just the full story, properly told. Hit subscribe, and you won't miss the next one. To understand what happened in that house, we first need to understand the family that lived in it, because Road Hill House, for all its respectable exterior, was one of the most dysfunctional households in Victorian England. The Victorian-era people and world of Constance Kent. Road, Wiltshire, and the Kent household. Road is a small village in Wiltshire, a county in the southwest of England, roughly midway between Bristol and Salisbury. In 1860, it is a quiet rural community of a few hundred people, dominated by the rhythms of farming and the social hierarchy of the English countryside. A household like Road Hill House, large, staffed, maintained by a man with a professional position, sits at the upper end of that hierarchy. The Kents are not aristocrats, but they are comfortably above the middle of the social spectrum. Road Hill House itself is a substantial Victorian property. 3 floors, multiple reception rooms, servants' quarters, grounds with outbuildings. It accommodates, in June 1860, 9 family members and 3 live-in servants. From the outside, it is exactly what it appears to be, a prosperous, well-ordered domestic establishment. From the inside, it is something else entirely. Samuel Kent, the father. Samuel Saville Kent is 59 years old in 1860. He is a sub-inspector of factories for the Home Office, a civil service position, respectable, providing a modest income that the family's lifestyle somewhat exceeds. He has been married twice. His first wife, Mary Ann Windus, bore him 10 children in 15 years. The toll was catastrophic. By 1860, only 4 of those children survive. Mary Ann herself is described in the records as having become weak-minded, Victorian language for what we would now recognize as severe postpartum depression compounded by exhaustion and grief. She was, by multiple accounts, increasingly incapacitated through the late 1840s. Into this household, around 1848, came a governess named Mary Drew Pratt, a farmer's daughter from Devon, 23 years old. She was engaged to look after the older girls. She stayed rather longer than a governess usually does. By 1852, Samuel Kent's first wife Mary Ann is dead. She dies at the age of 44, her health entirely broken. Samuel has her body interred quickly, in a ceremony so private that it causes comment among neighbors. In August 1853, 14 months after his first wife's death, Samuel Kent marries the governess, Mary Drew Pratt. She is 30 years younger than him. This is the first dark thread running through the Road Hill House story. Samuel Kent had, almost certainly, been conducting a relationship with the governess while his first wife was alive. He had, effectively, replaced one household with another, the same house, the same man, but a new woman now running it and new children being produced by it. He had done this with minimal apparent concern for the children of his first marriage, who now found themselves living with their father's new wife, the woman who had arguably displaced their mother while their mother was still alive. Constance Kent, the daughter. Constance Emily Kent is born on February 6, 1844, the fifth daughter and ninth child of Samuel and his first wife. She is 16 years old in June 1860. Her childhood is not, by any measure, a happy one. Her mother deteriorates through her early years. The governess takes over the household. The father turns his affection toward the new family. Constance and her younger brother William, born in 1845, the last child of the first marriage, are effectively the junior members of a household that is increasingly run for the benefit of the second family. Two incidents from Constance's childhood tell us something about her. When she is 13 years old, she and William run away. They cut Constance's hair short, dress her as a boy, and set off together. They get as far as Bath before they are caught and brought back. The ostensible reason is that they are unhappy. The deeper reason is not difficult to read. They want to escape. And the fact that a 13-year-old girl cuts her own hair, dresses as a boy, and attempts to run away with her brother tells you something about the quality of the life she is running from. The second incident, at her boarding school in the years immediately before the murder, Constance tells a school friend that her stepmother favors her own biological children over her stepchildren, and that Frances, the 3-year-old, is a particular favorite of her father's. That Frances is, in Constance's reported words, a tattletale. These are the documented seeds of motive. They are not evidence of anything, but they are the background against which everything that follows has to be understood. The second family, Anne Frances. Mary Drew Kent, the former governess, has her first child with Samuel in 1854. By June 1860 she has had 4 children, is 8 months pregnant with a 5th. Her children, the second family, are clearly the focus of Samuel's attention and affection. Francis Saville Kent is born in 1856. He is the youngest of the second family, almost 4 years old in June 1860. He is, by all accounts, a healthy, lively child. He is the child his father loves most openly. He is, on the night of June 29, 1860, taken from his cot, carried from the house, and murdered. The household on the night of the murder. To understand the investigation, you need to know exactly who was in the house on that night. Samuel Kent, the father. Mary Kent, the stepmother, is 8 months pregnant. Mary and Alice and Elizabeth Kent, daughters of the first marriage, aged 29 and 28, who play almost no role in the story. Constance Kent, 16, and William Kent, 14, the youngest children of the first marriage, home from their respective boarding schools for the summer. Mary Amelia and Evelyn Kent, daughters of the second marriage, aged 5 and 1. Frances Saville Kent, the victim. And the 3 servants, Elizabeth Goff, 22, the nursemaid who slept in the room with the 3 youngest children, Sarah Cox, 22, the housemaid, and Sarah Kerslake, 23, the cook. This is the complete list of people who were present in Road Hill House on the night Frances Kent was murdered. And the investigation, from its first day, was about nothing except working out which one of them did it. Commitment of the crime. The night of June 29th. What happened? Sometime during the night of June 29, 1860, a person rose from their bed in Road Hill House, walked to the nursery, took Francis Saville Kent from his cot, wrapping him in a blanket taken from his bedding, and carried him from the house. They went to the outdoor privy at the rear of the property. They killed him there, with a razor. His throat was cut with such force that the wound was nearly fatal on its own. There were also stab wounds to his chest. Then they returned to the house. The body was found the following morning. The blanket was still with him. The nightshirt he had been wearing was still on him. There was blood, a significant quantity of blood, given the nature of the wound. But when investigators searched the house over the following days, they found almost no blood anywhere inside it. No bloody clothing. No bloody weapon. Nothing that spoke of the violence that had been committed. Almost nothing. Almost. One of Constance Kent's nightdresses was missing from her laundry. This is the thread that the investigation will pull on, and fail to pull hard enough, for the next 5 years. The nightdress. In Victorian households, laundry was a matter of record. Households of any size kept written laundry lists, tallies of every item sent to be washed and returned. The lists were precise and functional. When investigators examined the laundry records at Road Hill House, they found that Constance Kent's laundry list showed one nightdress that had been sent to the laundry, and one nightdress that was not listed and could not be found. A nightdress was missing. The local police superintendent, a man named Foley, then made a decision that would define this entire case. A police officer found what appeared to be a nightdress hidden at Road Hill House on the very day after the murder. The officer, Alfred Urch, reported that the garment was dry but very dirty. It had some blood about it. He handed it to Superintendent Foley. Foley examined the garment and dismissed it. He decided, without laboratory analysis, without forensic examination of any kind, on the basis of a visual inspection, that the blood stains were menstrual blood, hidden out of shame. He set the garment aside. He did not preserve it as evidence. He did not investigate further. The key piece of physical evidence in the Road Hill House case was found, examined by an eye, and discarded by the local police on the first day of the investigation. It was never seen again. The first days, and the direction of the investigation. The initial investigation is conducted by the local Wiltshire Constabulary under Superintendent Foley. It is, from the outset, pointed in the wrong direction. The first arrest is of Elizabeth Goff, the nursemaid who slept in the same room as Francis and discovered him missing. The logic is straightforward. She was responsible for the child. The child disappeared from her room. She must know something. She is arrested, questioned at length, and released. There is no evidence against her beyond proximity. She offers a plausible, if slightly inconsistent, account of her mourning. She is released. Then rumors begin. Rumors about Samuel Kent and Elizabeth Goff. Rumors that the nursemaid and the master of the house are having an affair. Rumors that Samuel may have been involved in his son's death to conceal something he did not want discovered. These rumors reach the press. The Morning Post describes the case as for mystery, complication of probabilities, and hideous wickedness, without parallel in our criminal records. The investigation is in chaos before it has properly begun. And on July 9, 1860, 10 days after the murder, Inspector Jonathan Wiltshire of Scotland Yard arrives en route. The weapon and the planning. Before we get to Wiltshire, let me tell you something about what the confession would later reveal about how this murder was actually carried out. It was planned. The person who killed Francis Samuel Kent did not act on impulse. They had stolen a razor from their father's room beforehand, and before that, they had hidden matches in the privy, because they knew they would need light to see by in the dark. This is premeditation. Step by step. The matches hidden in advance. The razor taken. The moment chosen when the household was asleep. A child was not killed in a moment of passion or madness. A child was killed as the result of a plan. Executed in the night, in an outdoor privy, with a stolen razor and prepositioned matches, by someone who had thought about it carefully enough to ensure they would have light. That detail, the hidden matches, haunts me more than almost anything else in this case. It speaks of deliberation in a way that the violence itself, terrible as it is, does not. The Prince of Detectives and the Investigations. Inspector Wiltshire, the Prince of Detectives. Jonathan Wiltshire is 4 to 6 years old when he arrives at Road Hill House. He is the son of a gardener from Camberwell in South London, a self-made man who joined the Metropolitan Police as a constable and rose by the force of his own intelligence and observation. He is 5 feet 8 inches tall, with brown hair and blue eyes, the kind of unremarkable appearance that is professionally useful for a detective. He has been described by Charles Dickens, who wrote about the New Scotland Yard detective branch in his journalism, as possessed of a reserved and thoughtful air, as if he were engaged in deep arithmetical calculations. Wiltshire is one of the original 8 members of the detective branch, the division of Scotland Yard formed in 1842 to conduct plainclothes criminal investigation. In 1860 he is regarded by colleagues as the finest detective in England. He has solved multiple high-profile cases. His reputation is considerable. He arrives in road and begins to look. Within days, some accounts say within hours, he has formed a conclusion that will define the rest of his career. The murderer is Constance Kent. Wiltshire's evidence. Wiltshire's case against Constance rests on 2 pillars. The first is the missing nightdress. He identifies the gap in the laundry list. He understands immediately what it means, that someone has destroyed or concealed a bloody garment. He correctly identifies the missing nightdress as the most important physical evidence in the case. And he correctly concludes that the person who disposed of it was the person who wore it during the murder. He does not know that Superintendent Foley has already found and discarded the garment. That information, the first officer's discovery, the superintendent's dismissal, is not shared with Wiltshire in any useful way. The local police protect their own. The second pillar is his analysis of the household. Wiltshire breaks through what he recognizes as a happy family facade. He understands the dynamics of the Kent household, the first wife, the governess, the replacement family, the marginalized older children. He understands that Constance and William are the children most damaged by their father's second marriage. He understands the reported incidents, the running away, the school friend's account of Constance's resentment. He also investigates Constance's character, and he is not looking for evidence of madness or monstrousness. He is looking for evidence of a specific kind of intelligence and self-control. What he finds is a teenager who is, by the accounts of everyone who knows her, disciplined and contained. Not hysterical. Not unstable. Calm. This is, in Wiltshire's assessment, consistent with someone who could plan and execute a murder without detection. He arrests Constance Kent on July 16, 1860. The first reversal. The class system destroys the case. And here is where Victorian England's class system steps in and dismantles the investigation. Wiltshire is the son of a Camberwell gardener. He has no formal education. He has no social standing beyond his professional position. He is, in Victorian terminology, a working-class man accusing a young lady of breeding. The reaction is immediate and ferocious. A barrister retained by Samuel Kent on his daughter's behalf describes Wiltshire as the detective who is vulgar, greedy, and rapacious in his destruction of a young woman's life. The local magistrates are hostile. The press is sympathetic to Constance. Samuel Kent's social position, his connections, his professional standing, his ability to retain good legal counsel, insulates the family from the kind of scrutiny that would have been applied immediately and thoroughly to a family of lower status. Samuel Kent himself, it is worth noting, behaves throughout the investigation in ways that the most charitable reading describes as odd. On the night of the murder, he drives to Trowbridge himself to inform the superintendent, rather than sending a servant, and appears to have known more about the circumstances of his son's death than he later acknowledged. On the first night after the murder, when 2 police officers arrive to keep watch, Samuel Kent leads them to the kitchen and locks them in from the outside. These are documented facts. Wiltshire notices them. He does not pursue them. He should have. But he is a working-class detective in a Victorian rural household, and his every instinct and investigation is filtered through the prism of what the social order will tolerate. He focuses on Constance because the evidence, on balance, points to Constance. He does not look harder at Samuel because he has, apparently, already decided that they are cut from the same cloth, 2 self-made men, in Wiltshire's assessment. This is Wiltshire's blind spot, and it is significant. On July 27, 1860, Constance Kent appears before the local magistrates. Wiltshire presents his evidence. The nightdress argument. The laundry list. The character evidence. The school friend who reported Constance's statements about her stepmother. The school friend, under examination, says she cannot remember Constance saying those things. The nightdress is not produced because it has been destroyed or hidden.
Constance is discharged. The case against her collapses.
The second reversal. The investigation turns to chaos. After Constance's release, the investigation falls apart completely. The local police, embarrassed, turn their attention back to Elizabeth Goff. She is arrested again and released again. There is no evidence against her. A local magistrate named Thomas Bush Saunders, described by contemporaries as a crack-brained boggler and a meddling, vain old idiot, takes it upon himself to conduct his own independent inquiry. This unauthorized investigation produces one significant revelation: the testimony of police officer Alfred Urch, who finally tells someone what actually happened on the first day.
That he had found a nightdress. That he had given it to Superintendent Foley. That Foley had dismissed it.
The evidence that should have been the center of the investigation was discarded on day one. This revelation is too late to matter.
Foley is not prosecuted. The nightdress is gone. Goff's second prosecution fails.
Wiltshire, whose reputation has been publicly savaged, returns to London in disgrace. The newspapers that had lionized him as the prince of detectives now treat him as a symbol of official overreach, a working-class detective who overstepped himself by accusing a young lady of good family on insufficient evidence. He retires from the Metropolitan Police in 1864. His official retirement papers list the reason as congestion of the brain.
He dies in 1881. The Road Hill House murder is officially unsolved.
Dickens, Collins, and the birth of a genre. Here is where the story takes a turn that connects a 3-year-old child's murder in a Wiltshire privy to the entire tradition of English detective fiction. Charles Dickens had been writing about the new Scotland Yard detective branch since the early 1850s. His journalism introduced Wiltshire and his colleagues to the reading public. And in his 1853 novel Bleak House, he created Inspector Bucket, the first significant detective figure in English fiction, based partly on Wiltshire and partly on another Yard detective named Charles Field. When the Road Hill House case breaks in 1860, Dickens follows it obsessively.
He corresponds with Wiltshire. He visits Road.
He forms the view, which he shares in letters, that Constance is guilty. Wilkie Collins, Dickens's friend and collaborator at the weekly journal all the year round, is equally fascinated.
Collins had written about the new detective branch in journalism.
He understood, as both a crime writer and as an observer of Victorian social dynamics, exactly what the Road Hill House case exposed. In 1868, 3 years after Constance Kent's confession, 8 years after the original murder, Collins publishes The Moonstone. T.S. Eliot would later describe it as the first, the longest, and the best of modern English detective novels. The Moonstone is built, in significant detail, on the Road Hill House case. Sergeant Cuff, the detective in The Moonstone, was inspired by Inspector Wiltshire, particularly his investigation of the 1860 murder of Francis Saville Kent. Several plot details derive from the Road Hill case, including the missing nightdress stained with blood, transposed in the novel to a nightdress stained with paint, and the incriminating laundry book. Both Charles Dickens and Wilkie Collins wrote journalistic articles about the new detective branch, and both also created detective characters in their fiction soon after. Inspector Bucket in Bleak House and Sergeant Cuff in The Moonstone both contain a great deal of Wiltshire and his colleagues from that first cohort of Scotland Yard detectives. The character of Sergeant Cuff, retired to a cottage where he grows roses, melancholic, quietly certain of conclusions that nobody around him will accept, is Wiltshire fictionalized. The plot mechanism of the missing stained garment and the laundry book is the Road Hill House case transposed. The class dynamics of The Moonstone, the London detective investigating a rural household of good family, whose conclusions are rejected by the social establishment, are the dynamics of the Road Hill case reproduced in fiction. But Collins does something with the material that reality had refused to provide, resolves it.
His detective is vindicated.
The mystery is explained.
The ending arrives. The Road Hill House case gave Collins the bones of the detective novel.
Collins gave the bones a resolution that the reality had withheld. The third reversal, the confession that resolves nothing. On April 25, 1865, Constance Kent walks into Bow Street Magistrates' Court in London, one of the city's main criminal courts, accompanied by the Reverend Wagner and the Mother Superior of the religious establishment in Brighton where she has been living.
She hands a letter to the chief magistrate. In the letter, she confesses to the murder of Frances Saville Kent. She is 21 years old. It is 5 years after the murder.
She has been living in France and in religious communities in England since the case collapsed. The substance of her confession: she had opened the shutters and a window in the drawing room to suggest an intruder had entered. She had taken Francis from the nursery, wrapping him in a blanket.
She had carried him to the privy.
She had killed him with a razor stolen from her father. She had hidden matches there in advance to provide light.
She names no accomplice. She claims to have acted entirely alone. She is sentenced to death.
The sentence is commuted by Queen Victoria to life imprisonment, likely on account of Constance's youth at the time of the offence and her gender.
She serves 20 years.
She is released in 1885, aged 41. She emigrates to Australia, where her brother William is already living. She changes her name to Ruth Emily Kay and works as a nurse, eventually becoming matron of a nurse's home in East Maitland, New South Wales.
She lives to the age of 100. She dies in 1944. She never recants the confession. She also never elaborates on it.
The psychological breakdown.
What the confession does and does not tell us.
The confession of Constance Kent is one of the most carefully constructed documents in Victorian criminal history. Read quickly, it resolves the case. Read carefully, it resolves almost nothing. It explains what was done. The open window to suggest a break-in, the blanket taken from the cot, the razor, the prepositioned matches. These details are specific and convincing. They match the physical evidence. They are the details of someone who was there.
But the confession does not explain why.
The motive is never given. In 5 years of imprisonment, in decades of later life, in every account she gives of herself and her life, Constance Kent never explains why she killed Francis. She says in early accounts that the murder was revenge, but revenge against whom, for what, in what specific form, she never says.
And the confession does not address William.
William Kent, the unanswered question. William Saville Kent is 14 years old in June 1860. He is at boarding school, but he is home for the summer holidays when the murder occurs. He is Constance's younger brother, her closest companion in a household that was not kind to either of them. During the original investigation, Wiltshire noted that the window found open in the drawing room, the window Constance's confession says she opened to simulate a break-in, had been opened from the inside. To open it from inside, someone would need to be outside to push the shutter closed afterwards.
Or there would need to be two people. Constance claims she acted alone.
But the window detail has always been problematic for the single-person theory. Kate Summerscale, the journalist who published the most thorough examination of this case, The Suspicions of Mr. Wiltshire, in 2008, concludes that William was either an accomplice in the murder or, at minimum, Constance's confidant. Her theory: Constance confessed in 1865 specifically because William was about to turn 21 and come into his portion of their mother's estate. A cloud of suspicion over his involvement could have legally prevented him from inheriting. By taking sole responsibility, Constance removed that cloud.
William Kent was never charged. He inherited his share of the estate.
He emigrated to Australia, became a naturalist of some distinction, and died in 1908. He never spoke publicly about the murder. Constance outlived him by 36 years and died without ever addressing the question of his role. Why did she confess? This question has no clean answer, and the honest position is to say so clearly. One possibility is that the confession is simply true, that Constance killed Francis alone, in an act of revenge against the stepmother and father who had marginalized her, using the child she described as a tattletale as her instrument of vengeance. That 5 years of religious retreat in France and England had produced genuine remorse and the desire to account for what she had done. Another possibility, Summerscale's, is that the confession is strategically motivated.
That it is designed to protect William.
That the religious establishment she had been living in provided the atmosphere of confession and expiation that made the act feel principled even if its timing was tactical. A third possibility, one that the evidence cannot entirely rule out, is that the confession is false. That Constance is protecting not William but Samuel, their father. Samuel Kent's behavior throughout the investigation was odd by any standard. He had a history of pursuing sexual relationships with household staff. The rumor of an affair between him and Elizabeth Goff was persistent. Some commentators have argued that Samuel committed the murder, possibly in a rage, possibly for reasons connected to what the child had seen, and that Constance, who loathed her father, nonetheless took the blame to shield the family name. Samuel Kent dies in Wales in 1872, 7 years after the confession.
He says nothing publicly about the case.
None of these theories is provable. The physical evidence no longer exists. The nightdress was destroyed in 1860. The principal witnesses are all long dead. The question of who killed Frances Kent, and entirely why, and whether they acted alone, is one that the record cannot definitively settle. What happened to Wiltshire? Jack Wiltshire retires from Scotland Yard in 1864, broken by the Road Hill House case. His papers list the reason as congestion of the brain, a Victorian term whose clinical meaning is imprecise, but which in context suggests a man whose professional humiliation has taken a physical toll. Constance Kent confesses in 1865, the year after Wiltshire's retirement. He is, in the most limited possible sense, vindicated. The newspapers that had attacked him note, without particular grace, that he had been right.
Constance Kent had been the murderer.
Wiltshire's nightmare, that his correct identification of the guilty party had been destroyed by class bias and institutional hostility, is confirmed. He works briefly as a private detective after his retirement, including a notable case in which he successfully investigates the tick-borne claimant fraud. He dies in London in 1881 at the age of 67. The fictional detective he helped inspire, Sergeant Cuff in the Moonstone, retires to grow roses. Cuff's melancholy, his patience, his refusal to abandon a conclusion that the social establishment rejects, these are Wiltshire's qualities, transmuted into fiction, given the resolution that reality denied. There is something about that transmutation worth sitting with.
The real detective was ruined. The fictional detective was vindicated. And the fiction became the model for everything that followed.
The literary legacy, from Road Hill House to Sherlock Holmes. The line from Road Hill House to modern detective fiction runs through several clear stages, and each of them is traceable.
Wiltshire is the template.
A man of working-class origin, operating by pure intelligence in a world that dismisses him for social reasons, reaching correct conclusions through careful observation rather than class intuition. This is the foundational profile of the literary detective. The real-life detective's character and skill formed the blueprint for fictional detectives including Charles Dickens's Inspector Bucket and Colin Dexter's Inspector Morse.
Collins builds on Dickens's foundation.
Sergeant Cuff in the Moonstone, based explicitly on Wiltshire, introduces structural elements that will define detective fiction for the next century. The London detective brought in when the local police fail, the household of potential suspects, the crucial physical evidence that has been overlooked, the social establishment's resistance to the detective's conclusions. He also introduces, crucially, a detective who does not solve the case, who reaches the right suspect and the wrong conclusion, and retires in something like defeat. This is a more honest portrait of investigation than the infallible genius who would follow. Arthur Conan Doyle reads Collins and Dickens. He is also directly aware of the Road Hill House case. He references it in his writing. Sherlock Holmes is, in important ways, Wiltshire amplified to the point of infallibility. The working-class detective who operates by observation, who is dismissed by the establishment, who is always right. This is Wiltshire with the class obstacles removed and the results guaranteed. And Agatha Christie reads all of them. Her Inspector Poirot and Miss Marple operate by the same principles: careful observation, resistance to the obvious suspect, attention to domestic detail. Poirot's retirement, to grow vegetable marrows rather than roses, is a direct echo of Sergeant Cuff's retirement to grow roses, which is Wiltshire's actual retirement from active policing. The Road Hill House murder is, in the most literal sense, the origin story of the English detective novel. Not because it was the first detective case, it was not, but because the investigation's failure, the detective's destruction, and the eventual confirmation of his conclusions produced a story so perfectly shaped, so rich in psychological and social complexity, that it became the template against which every subsequent fictional investigation was measured.
The resolution and aftermath. What the Road Hill House case changed.
The Road Hill House case had immediate, structural consequences for criminal investigation in England. The most important is the lesson about evidence preservation. Superintendent Foley's decision to dismiss the nightdress on day 1, without forensic examination, on the basis of a visual assessment, became a teaching example for what not to do. In the decades that followed, the importance of preserving all potential physical evidence from a crime scene, regardless of the investigating officer's initial assessment of its significance, became a foundational principle of criminal investigation. The case also sharpened public and professional awareness of what would now be called confirmation bias, the tendency to investigate within a theory rather than investigating toward the truth. The local police's focus on Elizabeth Goff as the obvious suspect, their dismissal of evidence that pointed elsewhere, their protection of a well-connected family from the scrutiny that a lower-status family would have received, these failures were documented and discussed in the press and in legal and police circles for years. The class dimension. The destruction of a working-class detective for correctly accusing a young lady of good family produced a specific kind of cultural discomfort. It was one of the cases that illustrated how early investigations were directed heavily by magistrates, of the influence which well-to-do people could exert over local police officers, and of the importance of immediately searching and questioning the whole household at the scene of a crime, regardless of social status.
Constance Kent's later life.
Constance Kent served 20 years in prison, at Millbank and then at Woking, and was released in 1885.
She is 41 years old. She does not attempt to return to private life in England.
The name Constance Kent is very well known. She migrates to Australia, where her brother William is already settled.
She changes her name to Ruth Emily Kay. She trains as a nurse.
She works in nursing homes and hospitals across New South Wales and Queensland. She eventually becomes the matron of a nurses' home in East Maitland, New South Wales, a position of responsibility and trust in an institution that cares for vulnerable people. There is something worth noting here, without overreading it. A woman who, by her own admission, took a child's life, spends the second half of her long life in the care of the ill and vulnerable. Whether this is expiation, or simply the work that was available to a woman of her age and background in colonial Australia, we cannot know.
She says nothing about it.
She retires in 1932, at the age of 88.
She lives another 12 years.
Constance Kent dies on April 10, 1944, in Strathfield, New South Wales.
She is 100 years old. The First World War has come and gone.
The Second World War is in progress. The golden age of detective fiction, the era of Christie, Sayers, Allingham, all the writers whose work the British Library crime classic celebrates, has flourished and matured, built on the foundations that the case from Wiltshire laid down. Constance Kent was born during the Victorian era.
She dies during the Second World War.
She is still alive when Agatha Christie publishes And Then There Were None. She outlives virtually every person connected to the events of June 1860.
She never recants the confession. She never elaborates on it either.
Road Hill House. What remains? Road Hill House still stands in Road, Wiltshire. The village is a quiet English community, largely unchanged in its essential character from the village it was in 1860. The house is a private residence. The privy where Francis Kent's body was found no longer exists as a structure.
Francis Saville Kent is buried in Road. He was 3 years old.
Inspector Wiltshire is buried in London. His headstone has no mention of the Road Hill House case, or of the Moonstone, or of the detective tradition that his work and his suffering helped to create. What remains? The questions that did not close. Here is what the record leaves us with. A child was murdered in Wiltshire in 1860. The local police destroyed the primary physical evidence on the first day and spent the next 5 years failing to solve the case. A brilliant detective was professionally ruined for reaching the correct conclusion at the expense of class convention. A young woman confessed 5 years later and served 20 years of a life sentence. She lived another 59 years after her release and never said anything more about it. The confession explains what was done. It does not explain why, not fully. It does not explain whether William was involved. It does not resolve the question of whether Samuel Kent's documented oddities of behavior in the days after the murder had any significance. The nightdress was discarded on the first day of the investigation. Every subsequent question about the physical evidence has had to be asked in its absence. Wilkie Collins took this case, with its class conflicts, its botched investigation, its missing nightdress, its detective destroyed by the establishment, and turned it into something that could be resolved. Into something with an answer. The real case does not have an answer in that sense. It has a confession, a sentence, and a life that went on for a century. It has questions that the confession did not close and that nobody alive can now answer. The detective novel promised us that the brilliant investigator would eventually find the truth, and that the truth would be complete. The Road Hill House case tells us what that promise is built on. And it tells us what it costs when the promise cannot be kept. The house still stands in Road. And the questions, who else, and why, and what the truth of that night actually was, those questions still stand too. Subscribe to Enter the Crime for true crime and hidden history told with the rigor it deserves. And tell us in the comments, do you think Constance Kent's confession told the whole truth? And do you think she acted alone?